Well, fictionally in the book, I changed that to be Putin said he changes it to the dead man's hand, saying it's not a first strike that's going to launch this thing. It's anything happening to me that'll launch this thing. So if anybody inside his country that wants to get rid of him, he's basically let him know that, look, the dead hand's now the dead man's hand. If I leave, Russia's going down with me. So don't even bother trying to do something against me.
An excerpt from today's guest, New York Times bestselling author Brad Taylor, is here, and we'll be discussing his new book next. I'm Robert Child, and this is Point of the Spear. February is Black History Month, and my new book, Immortal Valor, about the Black Medal of Honor recipients of World War II, is out now. The book chronicles these immortal heroes' life journeys through all the pain and struggle up until their ultimate triumphs. I hope you check out the book to discover more as we celebrate Black History Month. Just visit my website at robchild.net or visit any online retailer. His latest book is called Dead Man's Hand, the 18th in the Pike Logan series, and New York Times bestselling author Brad Taylor joins us now. Brad, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now, you served as an officer in Special Forces, so you've got a unique perspective on the war in Ukraine, which is the basis for this new novel. Did you have sources on the inside provide any intel to help the book?
Yeah, not. I mean, one of the main protagonists is a partisan band of or a band of partisans from Ukraine that are trying to eliminate Putin. But I didn't have anybody like that, not that far inside. But I certainly talked to people who are keeping up on the case study of the war itself.
Because it's so confusing, the news we get over here, how it's going and if it's a lost cause, it's very confusing news that Americans get, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's on. And the other thing is that's not good. Even when you're talking about Hamas or the Axis for Resistance or Ukraine or anything, everybody in the news just wants to give a bumper sticker, a black and white 2-second answer, and they're much more complex than that.
That's for sure. Now, could you give us an idea of the origin of the title for the book without giving away the book ending?
Sure. Well, I mean, they find out pretty quickly on what it is. The title itself is what spurred me to write about it. I don't ordinarily write about current events, precisely because they're current and things could go left and right. It takes about a year, flash to bang, for a book to come out, and anything could have happened with the Ukrainian war that would render the book moot. But I was doing research on the Ukrainian war, precisely not because I was writing a novel, but because I keep on top of that kind of stuff. And one of the things everybody's worried about is, what are we going to cross the red line with Putin? He's going to launch nuclear weapons. We're going to have nuclear holocausts. That's what everybody talks about. And so I started looking at those red lines and doing some research on it. And I ran across a system called a perimeter system that the Soviets had. It's basically first generation artificial intelligence. And it came out as because of our own, when President Reagan had the Strategic Defense Initiative, colloquially known as Star Wars, where he was telling everybody that we can knock out any missile that comes into our airspace with this Star Wars system.
Yeah.
And that scared the heck out of Russia, because at the time, MAD, mutually assured destruction, was the doctrine that kept us from fighting each other. If either we started it or Russia started it, then we were both going to end up dead. So that kept us from launching a nuclear war. And Russia said to itself, if these guys think they can knock out every single missile, that increases their likelihood. They're MAD no longer works because they don't think they're going to get destroyed, and increases their likelihood of launching a first strike. And they couldn't compete with us in space, so they created a perimeter system, which was known as the dead hand by NATO in the West, which will become apparent why. Basically, it was a bunch of sensors spread out all out through Russia. Sensors like seismic sensors for earthquake activity, sensors that monitored communications between the Kremlin and the high command. And all these things fed into a computer. And if enough stuff was met that signaled that they'd had a first strike and there was no way they could respond, then the computer itself would release a communications missile that overrode the launch codes, and any remaining missiles in Russia would get launched into the U.S., which was why it was known as a dead hand. There was nobody at the switch. Now, all that had to be completely met. You had to have, if you had seismic activity, but the Kremlin was still talking, then it wouldn't work. If the Kremlin communications shut off for whatever reason, but there was no seismic activity, then it wouldn't work. all these nodes had to meet together to say we have had a first strike, nuclear strike, and then it would work. Well, fictionally in the book, I changed that to be Putin said he changed it to the dead man's hand, saying it's not a first strike that's going to launch this thing. It's anything happening to me that'll launch this thing. So if he takes a short walk out of a long window or drinks some plutonium laced tea or something like that, then nuclear holocaust would go. And he's doing it against his own people, anybody inside his country that wants to get rid of him. He's basically let them know that, look, the dead hand's now the dead man's hand. If I leave, Russia's going down with me. So don't even bother trying to do something against me. And that's where the title comes from.
Yeah, yeah, and that's really complex, that system. That's for sure. From my understanding, and I may be wrong on this, Putin is revered in Russia. He his people think he's doing a great job. Is that
Not so much.
not so
I mean,
much?
right now they've got there's a guy running for president right now who is an anti-war protester type guy
Hmm.
that's gaining a lot of popularity right now, which
Oh,
surprisingly so, because usually the elections are coming up in Russia, and usually it's just a farce. And this guy's running. He's got a lot of popular support. Putin has his allies in Russia. Obviously, he's maintaining strong control, but I wouldn't say he's revered. I would
yeah.
say he's feared.
Okay. Yeah, that's probably more like it. Speaking to something in the forefront of the news, in the afterword of the book, you mentioned writing a novel that's with a plot that's so forefront in the news is a challenge. Can you expand on the challenge?
Yeah, I can. I kind of touched on it because, it's current, anything can go wrong. And I told my publisher when I found out about the dead hand and I did some research on it, I said, and it's still in Russia. They still have it. I mean, I'm just like, will you update that thing with 5 1/4 floppy disks or,
Yeah.
have you checked the batteries on that system lately? But it was unique enough that I wanted to write about it. But I told my publishers, I've got three risks in this. Risk number one, that between me writing this book before it comes out, the Ukraine war ends for whatever reason. Russia takes over Ukraine or Ukraine pushes them out or they sue for peace. I said, if it ends, then, the book's not going to work. I said, that's low risk. I did enough research on it. I said, I think it's going to go into a stalemate, which it pretty much has.
Right.
Risk number two was Sweden and Finland were trying to join NATO. And they're hooked at the hips. It's both of us or none of us. We're both going into NATO. We're a buddy team. We're going into NATO. Finland, nobody had an issue with. Turkey had a big issue with Sweden. And I said that the odds are that's part of the plot of the book is them trying to go NATO and Putin trying to stop that. So that it's not an overarching part of the plot, but it does get the ball going. And I said the odds are, I believe Sweden and Finland will be in NATO before the book is published, but it's going to be super close. Well, then halfway through, Finland said, this buddy team thing's not going to work. I'm just going to do it myself. And Finland did get into NATO, and I was fresh and had to go back and rewrite a bunch of stuff. But I knew because Sweden was still the sticking point.
Yeah.
Well, the book came out like Tuesday last week at midnight. And then like 4 p.m. in the afternoon, Turkey Parliament voted him in. So I beat him. The book beat it out of him. The final thing was Putin himself. I said, if Putin goes for whatever reason, there's a health event or he just decides to retire or whatever, if he leaves, then the book's it's gonna harm the plot of the book because he's central to the whole thing.
Right.
I said that's the highest risk that for the novel, but it's the lowest chance of happening because he's a survivor, he's KGB guy, he's a strong man, he knows how to stay. When I turned the book in, and then right after I turned it in June, Wagner and Prigozhin crossed the border, started driving to Moscow, saying, "We're bringing it all down. We're going to burn it to the ground." I was like, "You got to be kidding me! There's a coup going on." So Putin, and it was nail biter for a couple of days on that, but then Putin put it down, so it worked out.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like a real roller coaster.
Yeah, it was.
You mentioned Sweden, and that was actually one of my questions. Part of the book takes place in Sweden. Now, did you ever spend any time there on assignment for the military?
No, never for the military.
Yeah.
When I was in the special forces, my area of expertise was Southwest or Southeast Asia. So I spent a lot of time in, Philippines, Thailand, all that.
Could you expand a little bit on the Sweden connection in the book?
Yeah. So well, every time I write a book, I want to get on the ground and do on the ground research, because that's just I can't look at Google Maps and figure out what the culture's like. We used to call it sights, sounds, smells of the battlefield. I want to get on the ground and see what it's like. And so for this book, we traveled to let's see, Copenhagen, Sweden, Finland, and Estonia. And Sweden's big play is, like I was talking about earlier, they're trying to get into NATO. Turkey is a sticking point, and there's a rapprochement between NATO and Turkey that's happening that Putin sees and says, I got to stop that rapprochement. I don't want them joining NATO. And so he tries to assassinate the diplomats who are running that part of the operation to get Sweden in the hopes that if he just, if all he has to do is whack one or two of them, and then that'll set back the whole process for a year or two, which in his mind, he's thinking, if I get another 2 years, then I'll have Ukraine. This will all be over.
Now, this is the 18th Pike Logan novel. Have you been approached to, I think we spoke about that last time you were on the podcast. Have you been approached by Hollywood at all to turn this into a series?
Yeah. And I get approached, that's probably the best way to say it. I get approached all the time. It never comes to fruition though. So, I mean, just last week I had a couple of emails and Hollywood's, it's really hard to determine. There's three things. Number one, are you really going to make a movie? I mean, because sometimes they'll just option the books to make sure you're not competing with something else they're developing.
Yes.
Number two, do you have the capability to make a movie? There's plenty of people that email me all the time that say, I'd really love to do this. I really love to do this, but they don't have the wherewithal they just don't have the oomph to make a movie.
Yeah.
And the final thing is, are they going to be true to the ethos of the book? I mean, I know, they have to change some things. I'm not saying it has to be exactly like my book. There's going to be things that change, but you can change it completely drastically. You could make Pike Logan, my main character, into a midget. I mean, once you give them the rights, that's it. They have the rights. They can do whatever they want to.
Yeah.
And so I've been more cowardly than I probably should have. And so far I have not signed up for some. I mean, there was a couple of them. I was like, yeah, let's proceed. I like this. Let's go forward. And then for one thing or another, it fell apart. One of them was, which probably had the closest chance of success. Me Too came out. The guy that was doing it was charged was accused of sexual harassment, and he just basically got blackballed from Hollywood, and that was the end of that one. So something happens all along. And so far, I've quit even. If they approach me, I'll take a look at it. But I'm writing novels. I'm not going to pine away waiting on Hollywood.
Now, since this is the 18th, are you thinking to go of going to 20, or do you have the future plots for the rest of the series in your mind yet?
I don't. I don't have a number in my head. I give 100% to each individual book. I don't do anything. I wish I could say I'm going to put something in this book, and in 3 books later it'll come to fruition, and 5 books later you'll really know what I meant. I do 100% for the book that I'm writing right now, and don't think about the consequences. And that actually has bit me in the butt a few times, because it works really well for this book, and then when you're writing the next book, you've created part of the universe. Now you have to deal with it. For instance, Daughter of War. I had a Syrian refugee in there, a child that she was going to exit stage left on chapter 4. She was just a way to get the plot going. And I liked her too much, and she took over the book. The book was originally titled Shadow Strike. By the time I was done, I changed it to Daughter of War. And it's one of my favorite books. It's really good. But when I was done, now I've got this Syrian refugee who lives, and I got to deal with somehow, or people are going to email me and say, what happened to Amina? You had a whole book about her. Where'd she go?
Yeah.
So those are the kind of things that threaten things, but I don't have a number in my head. I 20, 22. I don't know. One day when I wake up and I can't write anymore, then I guess that'll be it. I mean, I'm writing book 19 right now. We just got back a couple months ago from India, and it's going to be India focused.
The book is called Dead Man's Hand. And Brad, thanks so much for coming back on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
That's it for this episode. Thanks so much for joining me. Be with us next time, when my guest will be author Mark Greaney. We'll be discussing his latest book, an action-packed thriller about artificial intelligence called The Chaos Agent. You won't want to miss it. I'm Robert Child, and this has been Point of the Spear.
Music licensed from audioblocks.com. Point of the Spear is produced by RSC Media Group.